How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne and this is Deck Ready, my channel all about the Steam Deck and other gaming handhelds. That's important today because we have a lot of news stories to cover from both Xbox and PlayStation, because if these rumors are to be believed, both of them are majorly jumping into the handheld field when it comes to the end of this console generation and especially going into the next generation of consoles. I want to talk about how that compares to the Steam Deck in today's video. Before I jump into it, I took a look at the numbers and 90% of the people who watch this channel are not subscribed. I would love to get to 100,000 subs so I can get a second play button here down in my basement. So if you want to help me out, make sure you're not only subscribed but have your notifications set to all. I'm all about vanity here. I like the number going up. Just please take a second and help me out by subscribing. All right, so like I mentioned, in today's video, we're talking about an Xbox handheld, a potential Vita 2, and how all of that compares to the Steam Deck. So I'm going to break this down by handheld, starting out with Xbox. I know Xbox right now is like crazy. It's a huge mess with all the Xbox influencers on Twitter. The ride or die Xbox fans who have been giving free marketing for Game Pass for years now are not happy with Microsoft because if all the rumors are to be believed, they're just giving up entirely on being a console competitor to Sony, and while they are going to continue to make hardware, they're going to just put all of their games on PlayStation. But then we got an update on Colt Eastwood's Xbox podcast where he had another insider on, and they apparently know more about what's actually happening internally at Xbox than everyone else, and it's not as bad as what we've already heard. One of those things is that they're going to put out a new successor to the Xbox Series X in 2026. I would guess that when this thing comes out, that we'll get that all digital Series X to replace it, and that will kind of slot itself in as the Series S overall for the ecosystem of Xbox, and then the price will drop to reflect the price of the Series S, which would be good. But the real meat and potatoes there is that they're also working on a handheld, and initially I thought it would be something like, I don't know, the PlayStation Portal that's only built to not only stream games directly from your Xbox, but also take advantage of the Xbox cloud streaming that they've been sinking money into for years. But if the podcast is to be believed, this thing is basically taking the hardware that's already existing within the Series S and shrinking down its APU to run as a dedicated handheld. And it gets even better for us Steam Deck fans, I think, because Xbox is allegedly having their Surface team make this, and Surface is PC. PC works with Windows, so I'm assuming if they work with whatever operating system this thing is going to have, Microsoft will want it to be in some way unified with Windows so it can take advantage of the Game Pass app, and because of that, they'll have to kickstart this whole initiative even harder that they've been working on for months now, which is to get a controller interface ready to go on Windows handheld devices, like the Legion Go, the ROG Ally, and of course the new MSI Claw. Now, if you've been watching the channel for the couple of years that I've been doing it, you know that when it comes to using Windows handhelds, I am not a big fan of Windows on handheld devices. I think out of the many devices I've tried, the best one is the Legion Go because it has one little trackpad in the bottom right corner of its right Joy-Con, and while it is tap to click, which is taking a little bit of time to get used to for me, it works better than anything that's been available on the ROG Ally or any of the Aya Neo devices, so that's good in and of itself, and it kind of makes everything more manageable. But the one big problem with Windows on these handheld devices is that you can't use the controller interface to actually use the keyboard. So on the Steam Deck, we have great things like being able to use both trackpads. You can use the controls on the face buttons like the D-pad and the ABXY buttons to control the keyboard, and that works great. But over on the ROG Ally and the Legion Go, the only option you have is really to either use the touchscreen or, in the case of the Legion Go, use that little trackpad to individually punch in all the letters, which is cumbersome and annoying. And then there's the whole thing where the Legion Go and the ROG Ally's frame limiters they have built in don't work all that well, so you have to basically install RTSS, and then using it on these tiny little screens doesn't really work out. So all of that is to say, if Xbox is working on some sort of interface for Windows that emulates SteamOS, that's the one thing that I think could get me to install a dual boot situation on my Steam Deck where I could get into Windows, because despite the fact that the vast majority of the games that didn't work on the Steam Deck at launch do work now, I just still play a few other games like Fortnite, for example, that I would like to play on my Steam Deck, to the point where I would get rid of my Windows handhelds. That's really the only reason I keep them around at this point. I really want to know an answer to what's going on with Microsoft right now, but unfortunately the rumor that we heard yesterday that Phil Spencer was going to show up on MSNBC and kind of lay out these plans. That ended up just being a flat out lie from whoever spread it. The real news is coming next week from Microsoft. They're doing some sort of like business update, like business strategy update or whatever they're calling it, that they're going to tell all their fans what's going to happen in the future of Xbox. And that's obviously not great because Phil Spencer once again is coming out with this vague defensive wording instead of just laying it out as it is, giving people who are already pretty pissed off, and rightfully so, more time to just stew in their anger only to hear confirmations of what they're already mad about. I don't think that's a good strategy at all, but I think we're going to hear about the future of Xbox there. And honestly, I feel like that's about the time when they could announce this new hardware. So if Xbox is working on a handheld, which they have been rumored to be for a long time now, I feel like that event is probably where we'll see it. And if we don't, the latest I think we'll see it is at their summer showcase that they do every June. But yeah, that about covers the Xbox scenario. So now let's talk about PlayStation. So there was a leak last week that I'm sure you've seen at this point, if either you're dialed into the PlayStation ecosystem and you watch PS Ready, or you're just in the handheld ecosystem as a whole. But basically this rumor is coming from Moore's Law is Dead, who's a pretty verifiable leaker when it comes to leaking hardware that both Sony and Microsoft are working on. Interestingly, what he's claiming is that all of the success that Sony has had with the PlayStation Portal has gotten them to kind of come around to the idea of once again making a gaming handheld. And this time around, it will be basically a shrunk down PS5 chip. It'll obviously run downclocked at around 1.81 gigahertz, which is powerful enough to run not only PS4 games, but it should be powerful enough to run PS5 games as well. So keeping that in mind, when you look at something like the PSP or the PS Vita, the strategy with those consoles was to have the developers that Sony already has, like Naughty Dog or Ben Studio or Sucker Punch or any of these other developers like Ready at Dawn, take these franchises that were already working well on the PlayStation 2 and instead of port games over, develop new games in those universes, reusing assets and using side characters. So you got games like Daxter, you got games like Secret Agent Clank, you got Ratchet and Clank Size Matters. And then as the PSP generation went on, the developers started to get more confident to the point where we saw games like Liberty City Stories, Vice City Stories, which were then ported to PS2. We saw games like God of War, Ghosts of Sparta, Chains of Olympus, which were awesome. Games like Resistance, Retribution, you know, full on console games that you could take on the go. And then moving on to the Vita generation, they basically just continued what they were doing and had their developers make bigger console style games that were just made to be played on the Vita. So you got games like Uncharted Golden Abyss, Killzone Mercenary, Tearaway, Wipeout 2048, Black Ops Declassified, Resistance, Burning Skies. There were tons of games from their biggest franchises, and they kind of got to this point where it was like, why are they even having developers make these side games? Why isn't the goal just getting PS3 and PS4 games running on the Vita? And we eventually got there towards the end of the generation with games that were indie style like Hotline Miami, Titan Souls, and Helldivers, the original game. That was kind of like the best era of Vita because if you bought a physical version of any of those games that I just mentioned, you would not only get the PS4 version, you would also get the Vita version for free. And then because no one really bought the Vita, they just kind of gave up on it altogether. But this time around, knowing that the strategy from the beginning is going to be just letting you play your PS5 and PS4 games on the go, I think immediately that opens this thing up to a much bigger audience than something like the PSP or Vita ever had. We also know that Sony's big strategy right now is to also get to a point where their games that they release on the PlayStation 5 will also come to PC day and date, which is awesome because starting out with Helldivers too, you're going to be able to log into your PlayStation account and your saves and your progress and everything like that will transfer between your PlayStation 5 and your PC. So they're already sort of opening the floodgates in that scenario where you're going to be able to have your PlayStation ecosystem connect. I would love to see it get to the point where unlocking the PS5 version also gets it for you on PC. I know they'll never do that, but I'm someone who would gladly double dip in that scenario and get a game on PS5 and PC, so I knew that my saves would transfer back and forth. And if you guys didn't know, before I was a YouTuber, I actually ran a website all about the PlayStation Vita. I had to have had at one point at least 60 or 70% of the PlayStation Vita's library. I just talked about this on the Nerd Nest podcast in detail, so if you want more history there, go check out my friend Bill's channel. Just type in Nerd Nest on YouTube. But yeah, I am a huge PlayStation fan. My other channel, which is my day job channel, I would call it PS Ready, is all about the PlayStation. And back in the day, I was a huge PSP and Vita fan. But now with the Steam Deck, which kind of gets us into the third section of this video, I'm kind of past that point where hearing that Sony is going back to the well on making an official handheld that can run the games instead of just streaming them from the PlayStation 5, while it is extremely exciting to me in that nostalgic part of my soul, I'd just rather have these games on Steam Deck, right? Like the current Steam Deck we have, especially the OLED, will probably be a little bit underpowered compared to whatever Sony is cooking up, because whatever Sony's making is set to release around 2026 or 2027. And by that point, we'll have the chips that Valve really wants to use for the Steam Deck 2. But mentioning the Steam Deck 2, I don't doubt in any way that that device will outstrip everything that the Vita 2 can do, because Valve knows PC users want to get more power out of their handhelds. So going back to Sony's strategy now being releasing all of their games on PC day and date with their PS5 counterparts and having things like cross save, cross trophy support and everything like that, just like with the PlayStation Portal, where yes, you get good streaming to a good 1080p touchscreen with DualSense features on the Portal, you arguably get the same experience but better with the Steam Deck if you use Chiaki for Deck, because you get an OLED panel that runs up to 90 hertz and you can stream in HDR to the Steam Deck from your PlayStation 5. So the OLED panel and streaming in HDR, those are two factors that you don't have on the PS Portal, which, like, yeah, having DualSense features like adaptive triggers, like haptic feedback, both of those are great, but I don't think they're nearly as good as being able to stream in HDR to an OLED panel. So knowing that the Steam Deck 2 will probably keep all of those features that we love from the current Steam Deck, including the OLED panel, if Sony doesn't have that at launch, which we have no reason to believe they would, again, I would just rather play on the Steam Deck 2. There's also the factor that Valve planned for, where the Steam Deck doesn't need to be a device that sells millions and millions of units. Like, obviously that would help them and that would be good for us because they'll give them a reason to continue on with Steam Deck development. But the key reason they want the Steam Deck out there in the first place is because the best experience you get on Steam Deck is playing Steam games. So even if you don't buy the Steam Deck, you're probably still buying PC games on Steam. And if you have a Steam Deck, you're buying even more PC games on Steam. And everything just kind of goes back into Steam. Whereas Sony's philosophy, on the other hand, is of course to just get you to spend money on the PlayStation Store, which is great. I love trophies. I love getting games on PS5. I just ordered physical copies of The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered and the Legacy of Thieves collection because I had a breaking point where I was like, yeah, I'm waiting for PC on a lot of these games only to play them at roughly the same settings at a locked 60 frames per second. So like at that point, why am I even playing on PC? And I had a great conversation with my friend Jake Baldino over at Game Ranks where the future is looking pretty bleak for physical games and they're really cheap right now. Like I was able to get The Last of Us Part 2 and the Legacy of Thieves collection for $50 together, which I know I could have got them both for $10 if I just upgraded my PS4 copies, but I wanted the PS5 discs, so I picked those up. I felt like that was pretty fair as far as pricing goes. And if you look at other games that aren't as popular as Naughty Dog titles, they're even cheaper on the PlayStation 5. So when it comes to a PlayStation Vita successor, I am obviously excited for it. I would buy it day one, but I still think my default device, just like with the Windows handhelds I have, like the Legion Go and the Ally, would always just be the Steam Deck OLED or the Steam Deck 2. And when it comes to the Xbox ecosystem, I'm just not the target audience for that, guys. I know there's so many people always talking in the comments about how much they love Game Pass, and when you look at it from a value perspective, Game Pass is bar none one of the best values in gaming. I can totally admit that. Being able to play games like Hi-Fi Rush, Starfield, the next Elder Scrolls, Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 4, or whatever game is coming out this year, just with your subscription, that is awesome. I really appreciate that a lot of people get value out of that, but I'm fortunate enough to have a job where I can just afford to buy the games I want to play, and I play a lot of games for an extended period of time, to the point where like buying games is actually cheaper for me than getting a subscription to Game Pass Ultimate, because I don't play enough games throughout the year where the price shakes out, where I'd be spending more on games than I would for a year of Game Pass. You know what I'm saying? And knowing that the Xbox handheld is going to natively play games is all well and good, but Xbox is really focused on cloud streaming and streaming from your Xbox Series X to other devices, and I'm just not into streaming. I know there's other deck YouTubers out there who love using GeForce Now, who love using Chiaki, and while I think that technology is very cool, at the end of the day, I'm the kind of person who just wants to natively play games on the device I bought. I don't want to be connected to the internet. I want the option to play games when I'm on the train to Chicago or on the plane back to LA if I ever go visit Ray or something like that. And having a handheld that can only stream from the consoles I own or from the cloud, that just doesn't cut it in the vast majority of the scenarios I would want to use a handheld in. So yeah, ultimately when it comes to Xbox and Sony entering the handheld market, I think that's cool and it is exciting, but yeah, at the end of the day, I think Valve is in a really great spot because no matter what, you can play every game from every console maker on the Steam Deck, at the very least at medium settings at 30 FPS, which is basically the experience you'll get out of the PlayStation 5 anyway. Of course, the resolution is lower on the Steam Steam Deck, but when you shrink it down to an 8-inch screen, there's nothing to complain about from that standpoint. But yeah, I'm curious to know from some of you people like me who either switched over to the Steam Deck from the Nintendo Switch or switched over from the PlayStation Vita, would you be swayed back to the PlayStation or Xbox ecosystems if they put out new handhelds that supported the Xbox and PlayStation library of games? Let me know down in the comments below. And also remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.